So Megan, thank you so much for joining me. And just to kind of put all of this into perspective for us, there are some interview questions that I'll be asking, and really it's around, how being an author was for you, what the impact of that was, what you're continuing to do to get out into the world about TBI. And if for some reason there is a question that you're not comfortable answering or you don't think it's appropriate to answer, please just feel free to say, nah, not that one, and we'll go on to the next one.
Sounds great.
So I'm curious who you are and what you do in the world.
Sure. My name's Meighen Lovelace. My pronouns are they, them. I live in beautiful Colorado in Leadville, up in the Rocky Mountains. And I work as the mental health policy lead for the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, which is a statewide organization that works to advocate for people with disabilities of all types, to make sure that we can show up in our spaces, in our communities, and live thriving lives with access to all the resources that people without disabilities also have.
Sounds like you have an amazing way to impact, at least, and is it focused specifically in Colorado?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
But we
Okay.
work with national partners quite regularly. So
Okay.
oftentimes we find policies that live in the federal world. We will work with our federal partners towards solutions,
Mm,
policy solutions at the federal level, which of course the ADA has a long way to go, and we're helping it get there.
very, very true. Very true. My initial career background was in human resources, so I know just from a workplace, focus on ADA, it's an ongoing process. How
Absolutely.
long have you
ADA.
actually been involved with doing that?
Well, I have been working on public policy for probably 2 decades now. And prior to my traumatic brain injury, I was working specifically in food and agriculture policy.
Mm,
And after my brain injury, really realized that there was a way that I could take the tools that God gave me and use them to really lift up the people in the community I joined, the traumatic brain injury
mm.
community, and how I could use those skills to bring awareness and equity into the space for people that are facing struggles with traumatic brain injuries.
Wow. Well, and we're kind of here because of a connection through you being one of the authors in our book, Trauma to Triumph. Um, and I'm curious, like, what were some of the immediate challenges that you faced after your own injury, and how did those challenges like evolve over time for you?
Well, there were many levels of challenges. There's sort of the immediate challenge of how to find resources, right? How to
Mhm.
heal, how to know what it means to have a traumatic brain injury. And living in rural Colorado, those resources were absolutely not available to me. In
Mm,
fact, my injury was really downplayed by the medical community. Therefore, it was sort of like being out in the wild and trying to figure out what it meant to have and live with a brain injury. I didn't really know even what an occupational therapist was. And I didn't know that
mm.
one of them could come into your house and show you how to cook again,
Yeah,
how to
yeah.
remember to turn off your stove when you were done cooking. And so things like that weren't necessarily available to me. And thank goodness I had some friends in the community that were willing to kind of help me on that journey and tell me about
Mm,
occupational therapy and physical therapy, things that I could use to begin to use my brain again and not to go too fast because of course I wanted to go really fast and have it just let's fix this, right? And not realizing
yeah,
it was something that you didn't fix, it was something you integrated.
yeah,
And
right.
so that was really a journey of self-discovery as well. I had to meet the new me. I had to meet the
Mm,
me after a TBI. I had to grieve the loss of the me before the TBI and welcome the new me and do it with an open heart And that's part of the journey as well, oftentimes not addressed in the medical part of it. So
Right. Right.
part of me working for the Cross Disability Coalition was reaching out to them for help and saying, hey, I think that there's probably some things I'm missing and I'm not really even sure what those things are. And being connected into a group of folks that understood what it meant to live with TBIs and learning from my peers. So I think that in rural communities across the United States, it's probably pretty true that it's much harder to gain access to the resources that are appropriate for recovery. So it just needs
Right.
getting creative and building a really strong support network around yourself that allows for time and forgiveness, because you probably won't get it right the first couple times, but you got to keep trying
Right.
until you get it to a space where you feel comfortable, where you
Yeah.
know that you can show up in the world. And that's different
Right.
for everyone.
Yeah. So really, it's so individualized. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so it sounds like you were actually a person receiving services even from the organizations that now you're currently
Yes.
working for.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And I'm just curious, like, what prompted you to be willing to be an author, to tell your story? Like, what was it that motivated you to do that?
Susan,
Yeah.
she's
Susan
so
does have a way of
good.
pulling
You
people
can't say
in, right?
no. You can't
Yeah.
say no. And she just gave me an opportunity that I didn't know I even wanted or needed. And it had never
Yeah.
occurred to me to write about it. And I think before I wrote about it, I kept it close. I didn't tell people, oh, I have a TBI, or people would make other assumptions about why my speech was impaired or some
Yeah.
of the other unfortunate things that happen to folks that have TBIs. So I don't think I knew how to navigate it. And I think that Susan saw that in me and she was like, I got a way. I know how to bring to bring this forward, to make it okay to talk about having a TBI, to create a safe
Yeah.
space for you. And in writing my passage, I will say that I didn't know I needed to do it until I did it, right? Like,
Isn't it fascinating?
right,
Yeah.
I thought nobody wants to know this. I don't want to remember this. But once I got writing, all of the things that needed to come out came out. And
Mm.
I was able to process the entire experience without even realizing that's what I was doing. And
Mm.
in the end, I hope I got to share something with the world that helps anyone with a TBI or somebody who loves someone with a TBI know
Right.
that it's okay to be just who you are in that moment and that none of us need to be fixed because we're just fine how
Right.
we are with TBIs.
Right.
Yeah,
So it was a healing process for you, it sounds like.
a
Yeah.
lot, which I didn't know until I was in it. And I almost
Mm-hmm.
said to Susan, well, I don't know if what I wrote is what you wanted, but this is what came out. And so,
Mm-hmm.
but she was thrilled. It worked.
Yes. Yes. I know I've had the opportunity in the last few years to write a chapter in, I think, 6 different anthologies now. Same thing. I mean, I just knew that there was a topic that somehow I needed to align my story with, but it was like I didn't know either until I started writing, like what was coming out. And so healing and transformational. And it is things, they are stories that people want and need to hear. Like people need to pick up this book, whether
Yes,
they, right? Whether they've
yes.
experienced a TBI themselves or they know of someone who has. It's just
Mhm.
I think, vulnerability that all of the authors brought to the process that comes out in those stories.
But like, how much better would the world be if everybody understood a little bit more about what it's like to live in the world
Yes.
with a traumatic brain injury and how much more compassion we would have for folks
Yes.
sitting right next to us that just to say, hey, I don't know what's really happening in their world or in their life right now, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to meet this person with compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you mentioned a little bit about kind of the early stages of your own recovery. How did you cope with both the emotional and the physical challenges during those really early stages?
Yeah, it took me a while to realize what was going on in my body. I was still sort of in this moment of thinking, well, this will, like, I will somehow heal from this and magically become the person that I was before. And
Mhm.
so there was a lot of sitting in silence because I lost my ability to speak. And it's a very weird space to be in, to not
Mhm.
be able to advocate for yourself, to not be able to say, that's not how I feel, or that's not what's going on,
Mhm.
or whatever the case may be, to hear conversations happening about you without being able to have input. So there's a lot of frustration and a lot of
Mhm.
confusion and a lot of maybe me knowing that at the beginning, my energy, my brain energy was maybe 15 minutes and then a half hour and then 45 minutes, but for the whole day. And me
Mhm.
knowing, well, let me reserve that energy for things I really need to do, right?
Right.
Eating and, and, and life,
Yeah.
but people caring for you, not knowing that and seeing the
Mhm.
glimmer, like, okay, I'm going to try to talk now. I'm going to practice talking, but that would mean maybe a whole 24 hours of sleeping after because I had used all my brain
All
juice.
your energy.
All
Yeah.
everything. And
Yeah.
I didn't even know that. So setting boundaries
Mhm.
for myself and my own healing in a space where I couldn't speak, I had to learn how to read and write again. So I couldn't write a note either. Like there wasn't a
Right.
way for me to
To
communicate,
actually get it
hey, I'm
out.
done.
Yeah.
um, Once I got a little bit more along my journey, I had a note card, that said, I have a TBI and I'm very tired right now. And that's why I can't talk. I need
Mm.
your help because I can't drive, or whatever the thing was. And
Right.
so that was a lot of just understanding how to live in my new body. A lot of loneliness. It's really lonely because even if you're surrounded by people, you're kind of by yourself on the journey in the beginning.
Right.
And
Right.
so getting through that time was so quiet and in my own heart. I just spent a lot of time praying
Mhm.
and telling the world, like, I'm ready for my next journey. Like I'm not gonna fight it. I'm gonna be a part of it.
Mhm.
I don't know how to be a part of it, but I'm gonna be a part of it and trying to stay open-hearted so I could be open to receiving the healing that I
Mm.
needed, medically, spiritually, physically, emotionally. Because it is really scary. And if you stay in the fear, it's hard to heal. So it's getting out of that
Right.
fear. And when you first go to sleep, you don't know if you're going to wake up. You kind of go to
Mhm.
sleep and go, this might be it. Okay.
Mhm.
And having to kind of think about that at the beginning, and the
Yeah.
joy of waking up and being like, I'm awake, I'm not dead.
Right.
I
And
mean,
there's another opportunity, right?
it's
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
opportunity. And so to like every time you wake up and you have a little brain juice, being ready to be in that moment and to be curious about what's next, I think was really
Mhm.
pivotal for me in those
Yeah.
dark moments where you're just kind of laying there going, gosh, I wish I could talk. Or I wish I could,
Right.
you know, go to the grocery store by myself. I wish I could gain back my independence. That was a
Mm.
big one for me, is realizing I would
Mhm.
be and would have to be dependent in ways that as an adult and a mother and an executive director of a nonprofit and all the things, you kind of don't think that you're going to suddenly become dependent on those around you for your basic needs. So
Mm.
that was a journey for me as well.
Yeah. Well, and when you kind of fast forward to like who you are today and how you show up today, what would you attribute that to your TBI experience? Are there ways that you are now that you think are directly related to that experience?
Yes, absolutely. I think I grew much more self-compassion and compassion
Mm.
for others, patience, which hasn't always been my best character trait. I really got to cultivate a lot of patience
Mm.
and prioritizing life, because when you almost lose it, uh, the things that are important to you after are really quite drastically different. And being a, young career woman, I'm out on the path and I'm spending way too much time working, honestly, before my TBI, and trying to meet the mark and do all the things you're supposed to do to be successful and what success meant. And then it just became so clear after my TBI. It is my family, it is my children, it is my health, it is the joy that I find in the world, not just when I'm working, but all the time. So I was able to reprioritize. I was able to have this second shot at being a human being and cultivating what that meant for me, and not what it meant out in the world. That pressure, those ideas, the ladder climbing and the career stuff kind of all just melted away, and I got to step into my own self. And I'm grateful for the TBI for those, all of those reasons.
Well, I just, I can feel your energy. I mean, I can just feel your, I guess the way that I would describe it, it's almost like just excitement for life. That's what I feel.
Absolutely. You don't take it for granted when it goes away and you watch it going away. Man, do you really rethink what's important? And I still wake up every day with that sense of excitement and curiosity about what will the day bring. And I got to wake up, and aren't I lucky? And hug my kids, listen to all of their dreams and be present in ways that maybe I wasn't before.
Yeah. Well, and you talked a little bit about some of the resources early on, but can you talk a little bit more about what was your support system like, and what is it like now?
It wasn't very much at first. A lot of my support system went to take care of my family. As a single mother, I needed my friends to watch my kids, and not just once in a while. So my friends took in my kids. Amazing. Like, they lived with them. And so a lot of my resources went to that support, right? Went to, raising money to help me pay my bills. And so the emotional support was pretty skinny. Very interesting that my ex-husband stepped into a leadership role, and probably out of, kind of obligation. However, amazing job of just being like, you're not alone. I live in public housing, and my property manager came over every single day just to check in. How are you doing? So the support I got was coming from the most unusual places, which also taught me a big lesson about, that God will provide for you, that when you are out there and you have a need, that need will be met, even if you maybe don't think that it will be met from the space that you think it will be met with. Also, my speech pathologist, I think she went way beyond just her job of speech path. And interestingly, I have a child with a disability. So we had the same speech pathologist. And this lady had the unique experience of knowing me before and after the TBI. And so she was able to remind me of my progress when I would go in there and cry because I couldn't do the rhyming words and just be like, I'm never getting this. It's never going to happen. And all I could do was cry. And she would show me the video from the week before. And she would say, look at your progress. You can't remember it because you have a TBI. I remember it. I know. And I can share with you that you are moving forward. So the more comfortable I got with myself, the more I was able to ask for the support that I needed. But it is interesting because when you first have a TBI, you're kind of scary. You can't talk and you walk funny, and you just
and people don't know, right? They just see you, but they don't know everything that's going on.
They don't know what to do. And so interesting that my neighbors that I didn't really know, they were the ones brave enough to come out and be like, hi, I brought you groceries, or can I walk your dog, or whatever it was. That, interesting to see who stood back because it was weird and who stepped forward because it was weird.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, God prepares you for everything, right? And I just didn't know that, right? So I was for the people in my life that I considered my supports to do things
Right.
that they didn't know. But there were
Yeah.
people that did know. So you got to
Yeah.
step to that help. And, even when it's
That's so
embarrassing.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's like just being open and aware and just kind of seeing like who comes forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Hmm. And doing it without a lot of financial resources. I think
Yeah.
that was a unique thing for me. Being on Medicaid, having fewer resources, and not even
Mhm.
being versed in maybe what resources would be available to me outside of that system. I kind of just had to use what was there and make it work.
Mhm.
And as
Yeah.
much as I
Yeah.
would love to do some of like the light therapy I've heard people talking about, or
Mhm.
acupuncture, or these other things that I bet would have really helped, being
Mhm.
okay not having that, and being okay
Yeah.
with what I did have, and using what I had to move forward, instead of being like, gosh
Mm.
darn it, I wish I could pay for this thing or that thing.
Right.
But knowing
Right.
that what I could use would be the tools I would have to move forward.
Yeah. And were there any specific coping strategies that worked for you?
Sure. Praying. I did a lot of praying and
Mhm.
just meditation, and really getting back into my body through breath, and
Mhm.
just forgiving myself. So going into a meditative space where I could find gratitude. And I was blaming myself for my accident, right? Well, if I hadn't done
Mhm.
this, I wouldn't have had this accident, and I wouldn't, and I had to get out of that cycle. And so
Yeah.
meditating and praying, and self-forgiveness, and celebrating my victories. So any little
Mhm.
victory that I had, and, me walking from one side of the room to the other, that was a victory. And instead of being like,
Yeah.
why can't I walk down the steps? Stopping in that moment and saying, I walked across the room. That's
Mm.
progress. So really using the gratitude and cultivating the
Mhm.
gratitude. And so when I'm in those silent spaces, focusing on the gratitude as opposed
Yeah.
to, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay my bills this month? I'm not working. Just staying in gratitude and
Right.
let that be the driver for healing. And that is different for everyone. People can find, like, I like
Right.
washing my dishes. That I find so much gratitude when I'm washing my dishes, which is bizarre. But for me, it's this very like self-fulfilling, like, oh, they're so cool,
Yeah.
and so just something like that would put me back in the space of gratitude.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and in some ways, it sounds like because of the resources you did or didn't have, you had to really rely on yourself for a lot of your own healing,
Yeah, but it teaches you
which,
that you can do that, right? That you're
yeah,
capable.
yeah, yeah. I mean, amazing. Um, you referenced a little bit, kind of the writing of the chapter was a healing process for you. You want to talk a little bit more about that? Like how was it so, or what actually happened through the writing process?
Yeah, I had to relive the experience, which I was
Mhm.
actively never trying to do ever, right? Like I was
Mhm.
pushing it away. So I had to invite it in. And sequencing has always been a challenge for me since my TBI. So I had to go
Okay.
back, talk to my speech path, and talk to people that helped me at
Mm.
the beginning, and say, help me put this together. And
Mm.
and then in that, I started to have then body memories. I don't remember my accident, but I
Mm.
remember it more than I did before I wrote the book. And
Okay.
in writing it, when writing that first kind of the first draft and going, what? And then like writing a second draft and going, oh, and starting to see the story come out, like,
Mm.
like I was almost co-authoring it with the experience, if that makes sense. I wasn't the
Yes, it
sole author.
does.
The experience was writing it with
Yeah.
me. And in the end, maybe even for me. And I
Yeah.
was the narrator of that experience. So to watch that happen, first of all, you fall in love with writing. You're like, I'm going to write because this is amazing. But you also just like, it is a phenomenon. it is like this unexplainable phenomenon when you begin to put the words on paper and they take on their own life. Um,
Yes.
so that was
Yes.
really thrilling and really enjoyable. I didn't know
Yes.
what Susan would think about it. I was like, wow, I just went there. I went all the way there. I just went for it. I do not know if this is what you wanted, but this
Right, right.
came out. And I'm glad I
Yeah.
did like outline it and be so stern with myself about how I wanted the outcome to be. Because I think if I had
Hmm.
done that, I would not have gotten there. I let myself kind of free flow. And then I
Hmm.
had a friend editing for me. So I would say, okay, does this make any sense
Yeah.
outside of my brain?
Right,
But
right.
and then that was good to get their perspective as well, but then to remember that that doesn't need to steer the writing, because I figured if it
Right.
was really messed up or it didn't make any sense, that Susan would tell me, oh, this
Yes.
is
Yeah.
not gook, and what is this,
Yeah. Yeah.
no,
So
worked.
even the patience with yourself during the process was helpful to
Mhm.
just allow it to almost like come through you versus you like dictating what was happening.
Yeah, absolutely, and to
Yeah.
just re relive the experience in a different way and gain a broader perspective on what that experience was like for me when it had
Mm,
happened, however many years before I wrote. And I'm glad I had the time in between the
mhm.
accident and when I wrote about it, because I needed that
Yeah.
time to understand a little bit more about myself
Yeah.
so I could write about it.
Mm. Were there any pieces of the stories you kind of were going through the writing process where you were like, oh no, I can't include that? Or like where you were kind of hesitant?
Yeah, the
Oh,
medical
yeah,
part, because
yeah.
when you read it, you're like, wow, they really just discharged you. It's crazy to go back and to think about what could be perceived as real substantial medical failures. And I felt like, which is bizarre, but like that I was letting down my local hospital or my local community by
Mm.
outing them for not
Yeah,
having the appropriate resources in place, right? I
right,
thought, am I
right.
going to get in trouble for like,
Mm.
am I telling like,
Right,
if I
right.
do something wrong by like exposing that in this
Mm.
very, very fancy pants community of Vail, Colorado, which, talks about how great their hospital is a lot.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and I was telling a different story. So there
mhm.
was something uncomfortable about telling my truth in that space when the
Yes.
space represents a very different truth.
Mm.
So that felt a little weird, right? To just sort of say
Mhm,
this
mhm.
world-renowned international hospital that I'm saying can't figure out a TBI,
Yeah,
but they couldn't.
right,
And,
right.
you know, it's neither here nor there, but it felt like, should I leave that out? Should I not talk?
Mm.
Um,
And what
I did.
decision-making process did you use to kind of go with the truth? Because I think that's fascinating, right? Like,
That I couldn't tell the rest of the story unless I told that part,
yeah.
because so much of the rest of it was trying to discover resources on my own as a person who could not read, write, speak, or walk or anything, and
Mm,
so what an interesting way to discover resources, right? And so, but that was the next part of the story, which wouldn't have made any sense unless I did tell the part about this
right,
hospital,
right,
discharging me when I was completely incompetent to care for myself with a subdural hematoma. And
right.
you know, I didn't know what that meant when it was happening. I do know today. Maybe I mean, I just kind of hope they never read the book, but here I am with you, but like, they should get better at it. It's a steam.
Yes, yes.
There are lots
Yeah.
of people that bonk their heads, and I hope they're not
Mhm.
just discharging them the way they did me.
I know, I know. Well, and that kind of goes to the next question that I'm thinking of is, so obviously most of the authors, if not all, wrote what they did because they want people to be aware. They want to raise the awareness. Um, how do you hope your story has impacted others, or do you know how your story may have impacted others? Like,
I don't know. I'd love to learn a little bit more about people who have read the book and what they learned from
yeah,
it. I hope that anyone who reads, not just my story, because the collection of stories are
very
fabulous and
amazing.
just
Yes.
transformational. So
Yeah,
I hope that everyone who reads this book comes away with a broader understanding of invisible disabilities, of the fact that someone with an invisible disability is just like you, and you don't need to be afraid of them, and you don't need to
yeah,
put them into a little category that somehow others them, that we're
right.
just like you, and we have the right to love and life and a full life just the way anybody does, that we're not broken, that we're all really amazing people, that it doesn't matter how you get to your TBI, that the journey of getting there and then what happens after doesn't define you, and that we're
Right.
still show up as whole people outside of our TBIs. And I think that's what the book really does great. It shows such a
Yeah.
broad spectrum of our
Yes.
to get to our TBIs, whatever those journeys were, and how we have, it says it in the book, triumph, how we have overcome the stereotypes. We have not become, many
Yeah.
people will internalize it and they're like hiding it.
Yeah.
How cool that we're sharing it with the world, that we are saying that we don't need to internalize ableism, that we are
Mhm.
fully fine being our whole
Yes.
selves with TBIs.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it sounds like, do you get like a daily opportunity to live that? I mean, it sounds like with the work that you do.
I do, and
Yes.
I see the changes there. So we have been
Mm,
changing the way we do meetings with government organizations in the state of Colorado, and really holding these institutions accountable to making sure that when we're meeting with people in leadership, that we're given the accommodations we need to appropriately participate, that we have a voice, that if we speak slower, well, then you take more time to listen. That if we take longer to read the documents, then you give them to us sooner.
mm,
That in between the heaps of documents you've given us and the time we meet with you, that there's in between time so that we can ask our questions beforehand and
mm,
come to the table prepared with answers and solutions. And I do
mm,
believe that in the state of Colorado, we are shifting the way that people look
mm,
at traumatic brain injuries, that people interact with people with traumatic brain injuries, and that we're more out in the open and more accepted. The meeting I had today
mm,
was with the judges and district attorneys and criminal defense lawyers. And these are folks who oftentimes are interacting with people with traumatic brain injuries. They don't even know that person has a traumatic brain injury, and they're assigning other stereotypes to those folks. We're putting an end
mm,
to that, right? We're going to start talking about how your TBI would be a factor if you're in the criminal justice system, is a factor when you're in education. However, not a debilitating factor, an
right.
accommodating factor, and that you should
Yeah.
be ready to ask us what we need for an accommodation, that we don't have to come to you and say, by the way, I have a TBI
Right.
and I need accommodations, and that it becomes a normal conversation, just like any
Mm,
other conversation that we have in our workplaces, in our life, in our faith places, anywhere we go, that we
mm,
deserve to show up in a way that we can say, I need an accommodation. This is what it is. Thanks so much. And
yeah.
that's it. That's the conversation. It doesn't need an
Yeah.
you don't need, well, prove it, right? We're done with that. We're done.
Yeah.
Way beyond that.
Right. Right. And so are you also then working with other states, or are you doing any advocacy to help other groups within other states do similar things that you're
Well, it's
doing?
interesting because my work with the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition definitely bleeds into my other work. I am on the
Mm,
board of the Alliance to End Hunger, which is an anti-hunger organization in
mm,
Washington, D.C. And I often work at the federal level. I recently helped put out the White House strategy on hunger, health, and nutrition, working with the Office of Public Engagement at the White House. And injecting the conversation about people with invisible disabilities has translated into all those other components of my life and my work, which then has led to more awareness, more discussion, and more policy around people with invisible disabilities, like traumatic brain injuries, at that federal level. Oftentimes, we're just forgotten. They just forgot, right?
Right.
As soon as you remind them that there are populations across the United States who have invisible disabilities, whom may never receive what it is that they need to thrive. Once you remind someone of that, they're like, oh, we can include that.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So for sure, I think it kind of just shows up everywhere. And I'm not afraid anymore. I was afraid before the book to say, I have a TBI. Since the book, I am perfectly fine with starting out by saying, I have the TBI. When I do committee hearings, and you only get 2 minutes when you go before a committee and legislature, I ask for an accommodation. I get 3 minutes. Because when I get nervous, sometimes that little portion of my brain that I damaged where my speech is just decides to stop working, which means I can't always
just collecting your thoughts before you can, fascinating. So right there, by even asking that up front or acknowledging that up front, it's a way of educating.
Absolutely. And people always say to me, gosh, I would have never thought that you had a brain injury. Like, it's not like this horrible thing, y'all. And I talked to them about it. Why would you have thought? Because I spent years with a speech pathologist regaining my cadence. Because I work with a physical therapist for the part of my face that was frozen to unfreeze it, all of the little things. Sometimes my walk still, you might be like, wow, that lady's had one too many. But that's just my walk now. But when I tell people it's a TBI, it changes the way they think, not just about me, but about TBIs. And I hope that every time someone interacts with me, they believe that everyone with TBI has the mental, emotional, and physical capacity that I do in that moment with them. We all do.
I'm just curious, and I know this is not part of the questions that I sent you, but I'm curious, have you thought about actually doing a TEDx?
Loosely. I would love to. I don't really know the procedure and the process to move forward with that. The one that they have in our region, because I know they have regional ones, and it is very, very Vail resorts,
Is it?
People who are like, I'm a Fortune 500 person because I inherited a bunch of money and I'm smart. And like, so that's kind of what those TEDx are. I don't mean to like poo-poo any of those folks, and I'm glad they're Fortune 500 and that they were enough to be born into wealth.
But it's finding that right group though, to be able to give the right message. Yeah, I hear you.
So, I mean, I'm happy to be farmed out for that if you have connections, and I believe I could give a.
Let me think about it because because I mean, to me, this is one of the messages that people need to hear.
Absolutely. And to know that there is life. I mean, especially for everyone with a TBI. Like whenever I meet people, and it's sort of like a radar. If you have a brain injury, you can kind of you're like, oh, you have one too. You just kind of know. And I always want to tell all those folks, because you can kind of see the ones that are still struggling with it, and to say like, you're fine. You're fine today. You were fine yesterday. And if today is a sleeping day because your migraine is so bad you can't open your eyes, hey, you sleep. And that you don't need an excuse. You have to take care of yourself and love you. And if the people around you aren't getting that yet, that's kind of on them. That's not on you. And to just let everyone with TBIs know, right? You're perfect. You're perfect just the way you are today.
Well, and it's so fascinating because the next question I was going to ask, divine timing, right? It's like, how has your perspective on life changed since your TBI? I mean, and that's what you've been talking about.
It's so much a part of it because you cannot
Yeah.
get stuck. You can't. You can't get stuck. Your neuroplasticity will not allow you to be stuck.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
you are going to grow and you are going to
Mhm.
relearn. And when you're doing all of those things, remembering to love yourself, even if you're on those bars at the PT place and you are falling every single time you try to use your legs,
Yeah.
like that, you are still on the bars at the PT place. So it's not a, it is a success. And reframing that for yourself, especially when you live in a world where everyone is measured on their successes, and you're
Mhm.
successful if you have this many likes, or if you are on this many websites, or whatever the world is telling you about
Mhm.
your success. I think a huge part of having a TBI is understanding that those messages, they're not for you. They're not really for any of us. We're not meant to
Right.
kind of always be like racing
Yeah.
towards this unachievable goal of
Yeah.
whatever somebody has decided perfection is. And so knowing that has been such a gift, and
Mhm.
remembering
Mhm.
that has been so
Mhm.
pivotal in my ability to grow with my TBI and be my whole self with my TBI.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I
Mm.
want everybody to know that. I want everybody to know that you're
Yeah.
on your
Yeah.
journey with TBI. You're not on somebody else's.
Right. Well, and it sounds too like you just kind of have this mantra of almost like just being unstoppable. Like it's not, like you said, it's not going to define who you are, what you do. Yeah.
It doesn't. I have a sticker on my phone and it will be backwards here. But so whenever I take a picture and people are like, oh my gosh, what does that say? And yes, it's a swear word. But then people go, oh, can I get one of those?
Yeah,
And
can
because
I get one of
my
those?
daughter got it for me. And my daughter
Yeah.
said, Mom, this is you. And, basically, we
Um,
are all unstoppable. The TBI doesn't stop us, it
yeah.
restarts us. And aren't we lucky? We got a restart.
Oh,
Because if
wow. I
I
love that.
hadn't, where would
Yeah.
I be? Would I have missed my children's lives? Would I just be like working
Mm.
24/7 and not taking care of myself, which I was before? I have so much more after my TBI than I had
Yeah.
before TBI.
Wow. And what would you, and here advocacy really is your work, it's your daily work, but what would you like to see changed when it comes to helping people understand TBI? I mean, what would be like your ultimate goal? Like, what would you like
I
to see differently?
I want it to be taught differently to doctors and medical professionals
Mm.
in schools. I think that the science and the teaching are not in line. And I think that many people have gone through their education and their continuing education without a real sense of what it means to have a brain
Mm.
injury, how to diagnose one, what to do after one is diagnosed, right? It's so easy to call everything a concussion and to say, no big deal. It's just you just
Yeah.
go on about your day. Like, you'll be just fine. And to never go beyond that. If
Mm.
there was a broader understanding within the treatment community and the medical community around what it means to have a brain injury, I
Mhm.
believe that number one, we'd have a more appropriate data around the diagnostics, because right now I think there are probably hundreds of thousands of people going around with TBIs who are undiagnosed, who are
Mhm.
probably going, what's wrong with me? Why can't
Right.
I
Right.
remember something? Why do I
Mm.
get all of these headaches? Why can't I feel my left arm, or whatever it is, right? And
Mhm.
and if we were properly diagnosing and caring for
Mhm.
humans around the world who were experiencing brain injuries, then it wouldn't be this weird thing that we never
Yeah.
talk. It wouldn't be this like, well,
It wouldn't have
nobody,
the
I
same
don't know anybody.
stigma, right?
Yes. And it's
Yeah.
so not true. It's probably most people have some level of brain injury that they don't even know they have.
Right.
And so when can we normalize it? And I think starting with the medical
Mm,
community is a great way to just normalize these conversations and not have us as a group be institutionalized, be
right.
marginalized, right? I mean, I'm so lucky I got my speech back. I'm so lucky I'm walking again. But if I had,
Mm,
where would I be? Would I be in,
mm,
uh, they call them regional centers in Colorado, but would I be in a home?
mm,
What would happen? And we are just kind of warehousing folks with TBIs that don't have the support network in place, that don't have the resources, that cannot advocate for themselves. We're pushing them aside, whether it's into the criminal justice system or into the institutions,
mm.
psychiatric institutions. These were never the solutions, and they were never meant to be the solutions. And I think it stems from us not knowing what to do. So
Yeah.
let's have our medical professionals really take a leadership role and say,
Mm,
here's what you do when someone
mm.
bonks their head.
Right.
Don't
Right.
look at them
Yeah.
once. I mean, this is just, and you got to see it again. You have to visit that client who maybe bonked their
Hmm.
head and you sent them away. Visit them in 4 months, in 8 months, in a year, um, and understand what that person needs. Because if we're surrounding everyone with a TBI with the love and support they need, then they will be paying back into the tax base, right? They'll have high paying jobs and all the things that we kind of lose when we get a TBI. I regularly am disqualified from positions of employment due to disclosing my disability. And I've
Hmm.
even been final round in a job interview, and then I disclose, and you're not required to disclose, but I disclose
Right.
because I want to know who you are before I work with you.
Hmm.
Never make the
Hmm.
never make the job after that. So that discriminatory space around getting a loan or getting a job or us building our lives as
Right.
TBIs, that needs to look different. But the medical
Mm.
community should be leading that work.
Yeah. Very, very powerful. Wow. Have you written since the book? Have you used kind of that interest in writing and getting your voice out in anything else?
Yes, I write public policy. So I write a lot of very, very boring policy briefs. I do a lot of data compilation and research. And so I'll write
Mm.
fact sheets and one pagers. I'll
Mhm.
read big data sets and do executive summaries, and then I'll write policy and procedure recommendations. I even work
Mm.
with the rulemaking process. So as we get through legislative work, we're really following that through to make sure that the policies are in place in a way that works for the people that use them. So all of that is pretty technical writing. I also
Right.
used that door I opened through this book to write for me. So I've just
Mm.
kind of, I think they call it journaling. I don't really
Yeah,
know if I'm
yeah,
like doing that.
yeah.
However, I'm definitely writing. But I got the bug, Lori, and I want to write now. Like it's kind of just been in the back of my head of like, okay,
Yeah.
do it again, because it was
Wow.
such a joyful experience. So it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
there, but it's balanced with knowing that I have a TBI and I burned my brain out and I need to
right,
focus on my
right,
work. But
right.
it's there.
But it sounds like it has created this like spark for you,
Yes.
some way that it's kind of another option to share your voice. I don't know.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Any specific books that you have found inspiring to you or any specific authors?
I balance my nonfiction and my fiction.
Yeah.
During legislative session, when nonfiction feels like reading a lot of bills, I love to escape into the land of fiction. And so I am reading a Barbara Kingsolver book because she's
Mhm.
my fiction and I
She's
just love it.
amazing author.
You
Yeah.
know, what a way to escape the world. And
Yes.
I am escaping the world with Barbara Kingsolver for nonfiction or for fiction. And then for nonfiction, I am really looking at, university publications, unfortunately.
Mm,
Pretty dry, boring stuff. But
yeah.
learn a lot through that. And then when I do
Yeah.
explore nonfiction outside of work, um, I usually go to a spiritual place. And so
Yeah.
I read a lot of spiritual writings, both current and past. And honestly, the Bible, I land in the Bible a
Um,
lot. And so I read a lot from there as well and have a daily
mm,
practice with spiritual work.
mm,
Sounds a little funny, but I spent
yeah.
so much time praying when I was just laying in the bed.
Well, right.
I had a
Right.
chance to really, really cultivate that spiritual practice.
Mm. Well, it's fascinating because Susan and I have had a conversation recently just about, where does the spiritual part of recovery fit,
Mm, it's
right?
huge. And
And it's
that's,
huge.
we don't talk about that enough.
No,
And
we
sometimes
don't.
it can be a taboo subject depending on
Yeah.
like faith-based and it could, but you don't have to go there. And I think that that is really the North Star of healing for someone who's experienced a traumatic brain injury or their caregivers
Right.
is is finding that peace and that love and that guidance through the spiritual piece, wherever your spiritual
Mhm.
practice lies. And that's so,
Yeah. Yeah.
but returning to your spiritual practice to embed the work your brain is doing with its neuroplasticity. It's working so hard. Give it a
Yeah.
reward. It's like a break when you're
Yeah.
pregnant.
Yeah.
And so I hope
Fascinating.
we keep that centered or that
Mhm.
we tell someone who is just starting the recovery journey, well, you've got your emotional part and you've got your
Yeah.
physical part and you have your spiritual part.
Yeah.
And I would hope it makes everyone feel less overwhelmed, not more
Right.
overwhelmed when they're about their
Well,
recovery.
and if you think about like what you were sharing, some of those other things weren't necessarily intact for you, but the spiritual piece was. And so even taking a look at, like what pieces of recovery are possible for people based on where they are. And some might be more available than others at the beginning or the middle or, kind
Yeah.
of as people mature with their healing. Um, do you have anything specifically coming up that you're working on that is related to TBI awareness that you
Well,
would want to share?
I mean, it's pretty in the weeds, but we're just
Yeah.
working on a lot of different operations that are like the way that TBIs and recoveries are currently structured in our state is pretty remedial. Like you don't
Okay.
necessarily find a pathway to TBI recovery outside of like a court order, unfortunately, or outside of
Um,
um maybe having to go through like a traditional mental health system and a traditional mental health
mm,
diagnosis, or somebody might say, well, that's not a TBI. It must be, a personality thing or just kind of.
mm,
And so then if you do have a brain injury, you are aggregated to these really bizarre spaces in order to obtain recovery. So
mm,
what I'm working on is, and with a group of lots of really dedicated advocates and lawyers, um, is having the pathway to recovery start with your medical professional, right? And start from what would be considered the right place for it to start, right? Like you
right,
don't
right,
have to go to jail to get help with a TBI. And
right.
so kind of thinking through where our state puts its dollars, because that's why someone's going there, right? You might see someone and say, oh, well, I know where they can get help, but first they have to get arrested, or I know where they get help, but first they have to get a neuropsych evaluation that will take 3 years because we don't have anybody to do neuropsych evaluations, right? And
Yeah,
yes, Colorado's in a bit of a crisis, so I don't want to paint a horrible brush with Colorado. We're
yeah,
doing the best we can with the resources we have. However, if we reallocate those resources, if we take
mm,
that money and we put it in different spots, it's probably easier to get and more people can get help. So I'm doing the vastly boring work of reviewing all of the rules and seeing where we can make rule changes, that the monies go to the places they need to go, and that nobody ever has to go through what I had to go through to get help, right?
Right. Well, and thank you, right, for doing that,
Of
you
course,
know,
the least I can
for,
do.
yeah, I mean, amazing work. And work that obviously needs to be done. And so people, I'm sure, are very thankful for you and your time and your talents and your focus, and you're obviously passionate, about this. And I'm sure that there's other states that need similar things and similar resources and similar focus.
Absolutely. And we could do a lot at the federal level. We could reallocate some of those dollars.
Right.
There's a lot of dollars towards healing. They're just hard to
Yeah.
get. And I think that, the ADA was never the ceiling. The ADA was always the floor. And we've been meant to build the ADA. And that's, I think, what we haven't done. If we can build in TBI as a very acceptable, regular part of having a disability and the structures of
Right.
ADA, then perhaps every state will be able to look at and treat and fund people with TBIs differently than they currently do. And while that might not be the most inspiring story, I think it will help a lot of people. So
Yeah. Well, and as we, share your wisdom and what you've shared, with me today, how do you want people to be able to connect with you? Like, what would be the best way that they could connect?
Well, they can email me with any questions. I'm at mlovelace@ccdonline.org, and I'll share that with you if you need to put it under the.
Definitely. Yeah.
An email, share your ideas. I have a website for my personal business, which is separate from CCDC. It's called Mountain Harvest, and that's my policy consulting firm. So I do work with other companies on their policy platforms, and that's mountainharvest.org. And I'll share that with you as well. And I'm just happy to connect with anyone who wants to learn more about what it's like to live with a TBI, or what it's like to care for somebody with a TBI. Sometimes we forget about the caregivers, and I think they're just as important as we are in conversations about traumatic brain injury.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time and just your sharing and your bubbliness and energy and passion around all of this. And again, thank you for being one of our authors. And, let's definitely keep in touch. Who knows, what connections it can, what can happen, what can result from all the connections that we have with everyone from the book. And just good luck with everything that you're doing. And it sounds like you're just in an amazing space to be able to touch so many people.
Well, thank you. And I'm just so grateful that I had the opportunity to be a part of the book, to know you, to know Susan, and be inspired by everyone who wrote in that book and by the work that you're doing with Hobble Jog. I wish more people knew what it is that Susan is sharing. And
and that's part of this is that's what we're doing. We're trying to broaden that scope. We're trying to broaden kind of the reach, and it takes a lot of people, as you know.
Well, let me know how I can be a partner.
All right. Thank you so much. And definitely email me so that I have all of the correct contact information that you want us to be able to include.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye. You too.